It's Ira Gorlick, and it's Saturday, December 20th, 2014. As many of you know, I am been running with a couple of political campaigns here in Georgia, and I'm very interested in knowing how I'm going to win elections here in Georgia. And one of the things that I find interesting is I found this statistic by the Gallup poll, and I think this is a fairly good number. I would be interested if anybody has any disagreement with this number, but it looks good, and it says that 42% believe in creationist view of origins. To look at the numbers a little more specifically, we see that present God created humans in their present form. In 1982, it was 44. It's now 42, which is a little bit lower. It's been a little fluctuating, which is okay. But the fact that 42% believe God created humans in the present form, meaning that the earth is only 10,000 years old, is fascinating to me. I have a completely different view. I like this number here. In 1982, 9% believe that humans evolved with God having no part of the process, and today that's 19, so that's up. Now that's good. Probably in the 1700s, when our country was formed, 0% would have believed that percent of humans evolved with God having no part in the process. So certainly we've gone from 0% to 19% in only a couple of 300 years. I wonder how long it took for the change from Earth-centered solar system to a sun-centered solar system. That could have been hundreds of years also. And I think it's probably a similar process. So I'm interested in exploring that. And as you know, I've done a couple of videos with Ken Ham, who is the creator of the Creation Museum, and he's done a few things. He's got a lot of videos out there, so there's a lot of information we can look at. He also did a debate with Bill Nye, which I would encourage you to go online and see that debate and see some of the comments. And what I'm going to talk about today is that Matt Stopera from Buzzfeed asked 22 self-identifying creationists at the Bill Nye Ken Ham debate to write a message question note to the other side. And these are fascinating questions, and he's got the list here, but his list is a bit unstructured. So I'm going to try to structure those questions a little bit and provide some answers and see what I can learn from this. So let me step in right now and see what you think. All right, so let me start with what I would consider to be an outlier, and that's this one here. Is it completely illogical that the earth was created mature, i.e. trees created with rings, Adam created as adult? Well, to me it's not logical, but logic isn't really what we're talking about here. We're talking about science. We're talking about observable science. So is it said, if he said, is it completely observable science that the earth was created mature, might be a different statement. I'm not sure what he's trying to get at. If he is a self-professed creationist, I guess what he's saying is that, it's not completely illogical, but I'm not sure that logic has anything to do with this. Logic is if A equals B, and B equals C, then A equals C. Or if A is bigger than B and C is bigger than A, then A is between A and C. I mean, that's logic. We're talking about observable science. Look, it's not inherently logical to me that the Earth is orbiting the sun. However, I understand that there's this thing called gravity, and I understand inertia. I've seen satellites orbit. I've seen space shuttles orbit. We've talked about the math of orbiting bodies. And so while it may not be necessarily illogic or illogical, I mean, there is science to suggest that the Earth can orbit the sun. And it's not a logical statement. Is there science behind the fact that the Earth can orbit the sun, that bodies can orbit other planets? And is there observable science to support that? So I'm going to throw this guy out. I'd love to have the discussion with him to know what he's saying. I think I know what he's saying, and that is that in his mind it is logical that the Earth could have been created completely mature, that it could have been created with tree rings, and that Adam could have been created as an adult. That to him that's logical, but it's not scientific. Okay, I'm going to take these next two together. Are you scared of a divine creator? And what purpose do you think you are here for if you do not believe in salvation? Well, those are both interesting things. And they have to do with a death culture. The whole notion that fear of death is so huge for Christians. And I don't mean to scoff at that. I mean, it's easy for people who are in perfect health to scoff at death. But I've had both my parents die. I've had good friends die. I've been in the service during the Vietnam War. I've seen death. When faced with death, people want to really know if there's something on the other side. And for my wife, when she lost her best friend, it was easy to say, she's gone to a better place. You'll see her in heaven. We've had this sort of death idea in societies for a long time. The problem for these questions in the creationism debate is they really don't fit. The only reason they fit, and I think this is important, and you've seen it in some of my other videos, if you believe Christian thought, and that is salvation is the goal, and the only way to salvation is through Jesus Christ, as said in the Bible, in order for that to be true, many people, Ken Ham has said it, and I'm going to have some other clips on this, that everything in the Bible has to be true. So in order for salvation to happen, you have to believe everything in the Bible. And so this is not about science. This is about faith. This is about, well, I believe that there needs to be salvation at the other end. And in order for me to believe that, I also have to believe everything in the Bible. And so therefore, this is not science. This is just my faith. I have to believe this. Don't bother me with any facts. This is what I have to believe. Now, if these people are saying, look, if evolution is correct and the Bible is not correct, and then I don't have to worry about salvation, that's a good thing, and I'm willing to do that, then that's great. But I don't think they're saying that. I think they're working from this fact that they're scared of this divine creator. Okay, I put these three together because I think they're somewhat related. One says, can you believe in the Big Bang without faith? Another one says, if evolution is a theory like creationism or in the Bible, why then is evolution taught as faith, as fact, And the other one says, I believe in the Big Bang theory, God said it, and bang, it happened. So I think what they're saying here is this goes to Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. And you get to see this a lot from creationists, and that is that essentially everything is a guess. And physicists will agree with that. Essentially everything is a guess. Heisenberg talked about it. So what they're saying is, look, if everything is a guess, then I can believe anything. Well, I get that. And if this was a religion class, I get that. But even though everything is a guess, we still can build a spaceship that goes into space and land on Mars and take pictures and send pictures back. We can still make medicines that cure diseases. We can still predict the future. I can predict that I can record this, I can put this on the computer, and then put it on YouTube, and you can look at it on your computer. Is it all a theory and all of how that works, and in terms of where the electrons are in making that process, that electrons sort of exist and they don't exist, and there's quantum theory and all that stuff? Absolutely. But that's not to say that there isn't good science here that in being able to produce this video. And so, the question is, can you believe in the Big Bang without faith? And I think the answer is, what is belief? I think therein is the question in terms of all of these people, I think, miss the point of what belief is. And I think what they're doing, now that I think about it, is they're putting their view of faith onto my view of science. So when he asks, can you believe the Big Bang theory without faith? The answer is yes. I can believe the Big Bang Theory without faith, just as I can believe that I can store electrons on a hard drive and be able to bring them back the way I stored them. I mean, I have no idea of how that happens. I have to take a amount of faith. I don't know the science. Actually, I do know the science, but you know what I'm saying. I mean, ultimately, I'm not a particle physicist. So while I think I know the science in terms of electrons being positive and negative and being able to read that, I mean, I couldn't design a hard drive that could read. So I take it on faith that it can happen. So I'm not sure, though, that these are questions that really fit the debate. I mean, are they asking, especially when he asks, can you believe the Big Bang Theory without faith? And if I answer the word yes, so what? Can he believe in the Bible without faith? I think maybe that's the right question. Turn that around to him. If I say to him, if he says to Ira, can you believe the Big Bang Theory without faith? And I answer yes. Then I say to him, can you believe the Bible without faith? And if he says yes, then fine. Then that's fine. And see, and this is the important thing that I've said a number of times. If someone were to come up with a different theory for the Big Bang, I'm not wedded to the Big Bang Theory. I have no incentive or anything is tied to whether I believe the Big Bang Theory tomorrow. If somebody comes in tomorrow and has the Little Bang Theory or the Big Splash Theory or the U2 theory, I don't know. I mean, whatever theory it might be, I'll evaluate that theory and take it for what it's worth. I mean, the question for him, that's the question then for him. And for this other guy, he says, if evolution is a theory like creationism or the Bible, which, by the way, evolution isn't a theory like creationism or the Bible, but be that as it may, why then is evolution taught as fact? Well, here's the thing. It's not that evolution is taught as fact, is that there are all these facts that we know. And this is important too, because we have to talk about evidence, the difference between evidence and facts. And we have evidence. We have fossil records. We have plate tectonics. We have the natural selection. We have all these things that occur. And so we've put those things together to describe evolution. In fact, I probably need to do that. It seems to me that maybe these people don't really understand evolution. Now, that would be a good question. So if I was talking to this guy in the center, asking about if evolution is a theory, if I talked to him, I'd ask him, does he think he knows evolution? And then have a discussion about whether he in fact knows evolution. And then this girl on the top says, I believe in the Big Bang Theory. God said it and bang, it happened. I just threw it in there. I didn't know where to put her. It just... this is supposedly questions she'd want to ask to non-creationists. So she's saying she believes in the Big Bang Theory. God said it and bang it. Okay, that's fine, but that's not scientific. There's no proof there. All right. Well, these three. One of them says, how do you explain a sunset if there is no God? Another says, how can you look at the world and not believe someone created or thought of it? It's amazing. And the other one I love is, if God isn't real, what are raindrops? Not his tears? So the first one is, no, raindrops are not his tears. Raindrops are condensed water. In terms of the sunset, how do you explain a sunset if there is no God? Well, I explain a sunset by the Earth rotation and being in orbit around the sun. And how can you look at the world and not believe someone created it and thought of it? I just look at it and, I mean, I've been to some pretty amazing sites around the world, natural sites that just happened because of erosion, for example, or, I think that's pretty amazing, but none of those are arguments for or against creation. I mean, they're arguments for the beauty of the world, and I'd go back and argue that, well, does that mean that Chinese people who don't believe in Jesus Christ or can't appreciate a sunset? Or, I guess this is just, I'm just going to leave these as it is. You can marvel at it, but they don't really add to the discussion. If you disagree, just let me know. I put these two together. How do you derive the objective meaning of life? And Bill Nye, are you influencing the minds of children in a positive way? And the answer to his about influencing, yeah, I think he is. I have no question that he's influencing them in a positive way. He's teaching them to be, observe science and observe things and draw their own conclusions. So I'm not sure what that has to, well, I know what it has to do. And in fact, the reason I included them together is because the implication for both of those is without Jesus Christ, you cannot know what life is about, nor can you influence others in a positive way. And I disagree with both of those things. First of all, what is the objective meaning of life? I'm not sure that there's an objective meaning of life. I was born and I'm going to do the best I can. Why does there have to be a meaning of life? I mean, I'm doing this video and I'm trying to add value to my community. I mean, I don't need God to tell me to do that. It's something that I want to do. Now, I would assume that that's a good discussion in a religion class, in a philosophy class, in a morals class, in both of those things, but neither of those have anything to do with creation or of scientific method. I mean, they're just, can one, live a moral life without the Bible? And the argument, and you'll hear this a lot, and hopefully I'll have a lot of discussion on this. The argument is no, without God and God's word, you cannot, it's man's word, and man's word, you can't define morality. So therefore, you can't live a moral life without God. Well, I disagree. And the point being, fine. I mean, you can't force your morality on me through public policy. So, that's fine. Just don't, you can't teach it in school. And to that point, I'm not teaching people not to believe in God. If they want to believe in God, they're more than happy to believe in God. If that's what they think gives them moral justification for their life, that's fine. But I don't need it. Okay, so this is an interesting one, and this girl looks like a very intelligent girl. I'm not going to question her intelligence, but she says here, because science by definition is a theory, not testable, observable, nor replicatable. Well, I don't know where that comes from. She must have heard that in church or in some conference somewhere, that science by definition is a theory, and a theory means not testable, observable, nor replicatable. And I would just say that she's wrong. That's not what science is. In fact, science is the exact opposite. When she of not, if she said that science is testable, observable, and repeatable, that's what makes good science. So if you have an experiment, let's say, what would be an experiment? That I can shoot a rocket to orbit the Earth. I can orbit a satellite. I can put a satellite into orbit. That's science. It's testable. You can actually test whether you can put a satellite in orbit. It's observable. You can observe that satellite in orbit, and you can repeat it. You can repeat putting that satellite in orbit. And so all the science that goes into that, the physics of thrust, how much chemicals, how do you combine chemicals to get the required thrust? The radio signals, how do you get radio signals? How do you do navigation? All that stuff is science. And all that is testable, observable, and repeatable. And let's talk about the theory of evolution. So what's testable about the theory of evolution? Well, the theory of evolution, let's say, is natural selection. Or a part of the theory of evolution. One of the things that supports evolution is natural selection. Well, if you go to Ken Ham and look at his videos, Ken Ham agrees with natural selection. Ken Ham says natural selection happens. He talks about it all the time. He doesn't agree with molecules to man, but he believes that after Noah, his belief is Noah came up with the kinds of animals. Let's say he came up with canines, with dogs, and after Noah, the canines evolved into coyotes and domestic dogs and all those things through natural selection. So natural selection is testable. It's observable. We can observe natural selection, and we see it all the time. In fact, go to Ken Ham, look at his stuff, and you'll see he shows moths, he shows viruses. He talks about how one of his friends got sick with a superbug, and he talks about how that was natural selection. And so we have natural selection. Darwin's natural selection is testable, observable, and repeatable. And I don't think any creationist would argue. Well, I shouldn't say that. No reasonable creationist would argue whether natural selection occurs, which is one of the important parts of evolution. Now, some of the other parts may be a little less testable and a little less observable, but that's the point. So let's go back to creationism. What's testable, observable, and replicatable in the Bible? Can I test the Bible? I mean, I assume this girl believes that that the Bible is God's word, that God wrote the Bible. Okay, explain to me how that's testable, observable, or replicatable. How do you test whether God wrote the Bible or not? Now, maybe she can come up with some good tests. That's great, and I think that's where the curriculum for creationism need to be. If they have ways to test the theories of the Bible, that the Bible is God's word, and God's word is 100% correct, then let her put forth those tests. Let's go out and let the scientific community have at it and have discussions. And of course, then she has to say, if at the end of the day the evidence shows that it's not correct, then she should change. If she goes into this debate saying, no, it doesn't matter what the evidence says. I believe that the Bible is the Word of God, and so therefore it's not science, and it needs to be taught in religion class and not science class. I want to add a couple more things to this young lady. She says, why do you object to creationism or intelligent design being taught in school? Well, I have to tell you, I personally am not sure I do object to creationism or intelligent design being taught in school. Especially, I have no problem with it being taught as a religion or history or comparative social studies. So let's get that off the table. I have no problem with that being taught in religion classes. But if we're talking about being taught in science class, then we need to be talking about, and she brings it out, testable, observable, and repeatable. If we teach it in science class, then what we have to do is say that creationism is not testable, observable, or repeatable, or and in fact, by the way, creationism really isn't what is the theory. The theory is that God wrote the Bible, and 100% of the Bible is correct. Creationism is not the theory. Creationism is I don't know what you would call it. The theory that, just like we talk about evolution, the theory is that God wrote the Bible, and the Bible is true. God said it, therefore it's true. We saw the other one I had a few minutes ago where the woman said that the Big Bang Theory is God said it and bang, it was there. So I'd have her say, great, I personally am looking to develop a curriculum to teach creationism and intelligent design in middle school science classes. So she needs to tell me where the testable, observable, and repeatable experiments are that would do that. One final thing, and so let's talk about this for a second. One of the things in terms of creationism is a young earth. One of the things that argue against the young earth is all the radiocarbon dating, the radioactive decay dating. And there's any number, it's carbon-14, and there's any number of things to do that. Many creationists have argued that dating is not correct. Okay, so what they need to do, what creationists need to do to be included in a science class, is come up with experiments that show that dating is not correct. You just can't say it's not correct. If you're going to prove that carbon dating or that radioactive dating of the Earth is not correct, then you need to be able to say, okay, here's a testable, observable, and repeatable experiment that shows it's not correct. Does that make sense? Okay, this is an interesting one, and probably the one that got me the most thinking, which is why I love doing this, because I wasn't sure exactly what was going on here. And this is a good scientific argument. both of these questioners, one, does not the second law of thermodynamics disprove evolution? And look at his smile. I guess he's saying, see, I gotcha. And the other one, if the Big Bang Theory is true and taught as science along with evolution, why do the laws of thermodynamics debunk said theories? So, okay, so let me go to the internet. So what I did is I typed in 3 laws of thermodynamics, and this is what I came up with. So the second law of thermodynamics is, the second law of thermodynamics states that entropy of any isolated system not in thermal equilibrium almost always increases. I don't know what that has to do with creation, but let's see what we can get. So what it says here, just as an example, second law, a simple application of the second law of thermodynamics is that a room, if not cleaned and tidied, will inevitably become more messy and disorderly over time, regardless of how careful one is to keep it clean. When a room is cleaned, its entropy decreases. Entropy, I think, means chaos. So disorder. Entropy is disorder, chaos. So when the room is cleaned, its entropy decreases. It's become more orderly. But the effort to clean it has resulted in an increase in entropy outside the room that exceeds the entropy loss. Well, I'm not sure what that has to do with anything. I'm not a physicist. So let's go here. This is the talk origins, 5 misconceptions about evolution. And here's one. Evolution violates the second law of thermodynamics. This shows more misconception about thermodynamics than evolution. The second law of thermodynamics says no process is possible in which the sole result of the transfer of energy from cooler to a hotter. All of this is science stuff. Let's see if I can get. Okay, try this. Creationists thus misinterpret the second to say that things inevitably progress from order to disorder. All right, so somehow they're saying, I think what creationists are saying is, if the second law of thermodynamics is that things naturally move to disorder, and evolution is an ordering of things. So if you think about the human being as a higher order, is more ordered than non-human beings, or molecules that can create more molecules is more ordered than non-molecules. So they're saying, well, wait a minute, that violates evolution. That how can things like that happen naturally? Now, what the argument is that the non-creationists will say is that, well, if you put enough energy in, an ice cube, for example, that if you create an ice cube, you're putting in energy, you're taking the disorder of the water molecules and structuring it into order of a nice solid ice. And therefore, things can get more ordered given enough energy. Now, let me go to the creation.com, which would say, the article deals with 3 common questions as creationist thermodynamic arguments and rebuts some common evolutionary counter-arguments. So going back to the ice cube, they actually use the ice cube example, I think, here. And you might want to go to this website to check it out. No, I don't think he uses the ice cubes, maybe down here. Oh, yeah, here. The ice example is thermodynamically irrelevant to the origin of life. When ice freezes, it releases heat energy into the environment. This causes entropy increase in the surroundings, which is what the Second Amendment would say. If the temperature is low enough, the entropy increases is greater than the loss of entropy crystal. But the formation of proteins from amino acids and nuclei not only lowers their entropy, but it removes heat. Thus, ordinary will not simultaneously form proteins and nucleic at any temperature. He says the open systems argument does not help evolution. Raw energy cannot generate the specified complex information in living things. So it seems to me that the questioners, while smug, are saying, doesn't the second law of thermodynamics argue against evolution? The answer is no, not really. I guess it does if you believe that you cannot create enough, there's not enough energy to create the complex information that evolution or that creationists say is needed. But that's okay. So that's a scientific discussion. We should be having that as a scientific discussion. That probably is one of the better ones that you would then, if I was going to put a curriculum together, I would say, okay, we need to have a discussion of the second law of thermodynamics, which would mean, if you're going to put a curriculum together, that we would need a class that taught thermodynamics. And so you would have to have all of the other science associated with it. So I would say this one maybe is a bit of a push. I think that I still, in reading it from what I can see, I still land on the side of the evolutionist on this, that it's not a convincing argument to me from a creationist that the second law of thermodynamics makes evolution impossible. So I don't think it debunks it. But if that's the key, then we can throw out all the arguments and we can focus on this. And let me point out one more thing here too. If in fact the second law does not debunk evolution, would those that argue for a 100% correct Bible then say, okay, then creationism can't work? Whereas I could argue, or at least in my mind, say that the second law of thermodynamics is not critical to my belief of evolution, that in and of itself is not sufficient for my change of mind in terms of not believing in evolution. You would have to show me a little bit more on the second law of why that should destroy my view of natural selection and change over time and all those other things. All right, these next three are fit into a class, and they're somewhat classic. I'm going to play you a clip from Megan Fox in a second. First one is, if we come from monkeys, why are there still monkeys? There is no in-between. The only one found has been Lucy, and there are only a few pieces of and then the other one is, why have we found only one Lucy when we have found more than one of everything else? Okay, and let me play Megan Fox. This is her comments that she had as she toured the Chicago Natural History Museum, and it echoes the same kind of thing, but I thought it's cute, so I wanted to play it.
At first, all eukaryotes were single-celled, and many still are today. What? If many still are today, then that would support the theory that they have never changed, that they have always been as they are today. Not that they started someplace else and then are here, but they were always this and still are today. This makes no sense. No sense. This is all just guessing. All of it. There isn't one bit of evidence here, because guess why? There's no missing links. Not all these so-called missing links, not one has been found. That is not a hoax, that is not a joke, that is not somebody's idea of a prank, or someone's idea of trying to get their theories made into laws. There is no such thing as a missing link. It doesn't exist. That's why it's called missing. That's why they're missing. We don't have any examples of plants going from one type of plant to another type of plant. All we have are examples of plants that have always been algae, that has always been algae, and horsetails that have always been horsetails, and ferns that have always been ferns, that have never been anything else. But no, we're just going to continue to believe that there are missing links out there. We just haven't found them yet. That's got to be it.
Okay, so for this part, let me just go to the internet for a couple of things. So I start off by just Googling it, and here's all the intermediate fossils. So when they say there's no missing link or no fossil, there's only Lucy, just do a quick Google search and you're going to see hundreds of examples of either intermediate fossils or other fossils that would argue against the fact when they say there's only one Lucy. But I also found some other things. So I thought this was sort of interesting. This was from the Smithsonian, Human Evolution Evidence. And you have artifacts. Here's all the artifacts under human fossils. They have all the fossils they found, and I thought this was an interesting one here in terms of the different fossils that they found and how evolutionists put it all together depending on, this is as we go back in time, and the family tree, which then goes back to the question that Megan Fox asked about if there's evolution, why is the original still there? And then the one question is if we evolved from monkeys, why are there still monkeys? And clearly, we came from Britain, but there's still Britons, and okay. And then I thought this was interesting. I brought it up before, and I went to it again. This creation.com, which is a very interesting website, and here is their attempt, the sequel to Refuting Evolution, that refutes the latest argument to support evolution. And the argument, and of course this is evolution, the argument is evolution to mankind. And this is what Ken Ham calls molecules to man, which I think is important. And humans evolved from ape-like creatures, and missing links found. So, and here's where Lucy comes up. This is probably, somebody may have read this, which is why they said it. The discoverer, Donald Johanson, the discoverer of the alleged missing link, Lucy, was featured on PBS. And let's see. Okay, and it says PBS offered little actual evidence. The fossil record is full of holes, and the missing link claims become boring after a while because they are so often discredited. The nearest thing to evidence was Lisa Shapiro, University of Texas, showing how flexible a lemur's spine. The lemur can move on all fours. So here it says, Scientific America asserts that we have found a series of hominoid fossils that link humans to an ape-like ancestor. And then here Scientific America also makes this amazing claim. Perhaps 20 or more hominoids, not all of them ancestors, fill the gap between Lucy and Australopithecine and modern humans. And then the creationists ask, how could these alleged 20 or more hominids fill the gap if they are not all ancestors? That is, they have fallen out of the gap on the side. So I'll go back to this, and this answers the question in terms of how can they? Well, this is the model that it paints. The links are still missing. The ape-man fossils are often based on fragmentary remains, and this is true of the latest of a long series of missing link claims. But when more bones are evacuated, the specimens are found to be either man or non-man. Even if there was such a claim of similar creatures, common appearance does not prove common origin. But the claim is groundless anyway. What the fossil record shows in reality, even granted the evolutionary dating methods, is that this alleged clear-cut progression exists only in the minds of evolutionists. They call them evolutionary popularists. Marvin Liebenow shows that the various alleged ape men do not form a smooth sequence in evolutionary ages, but overlap considerably. For example, the time span of Homo sapiens fossils contains the time span of fossils for Homo erectus, supposedly our ancestors, which goes back to the comment about if we came out of Homo erectus, why are there both? But we talked about that already. So all of that makes sense. But then I found something even better, I think, that really helped me, I think, understand this. And let me see if I can find it. Okay. So this is a website. I'm not sure what this website is. It's about.com. Fossils and evolution. Fossil evidence supports evolution. Okay. And here's what it says. When you hear talk of evidence of evolution, the first thing frequently comes to mind for most people are fossils. The fossil record has one important unique characteristic. It is our only actual glimpse into the past where ancient descent is proposed to have taken place. As such, it provides invaluable evidence for common descent. The fossil record is not complete, and this is important to the creationists who think that evolutionists like myself believe it's complete. No, we know it's not complete. Fossilization is a rare event, and so this is to be expected, but there's still a wealth of fossil information. If you look at the fossil record, you find a succession of organisms that suggest a history of incremental development from one species to the other. You see very simple organisms at first, and then new and more complex organisms appearing over time. The characteristics of newer organisms frequently appear to be modified forms of characteristics of the older organisms. The succession of life forms from simpler to more complex, molecules to man, as Ken Ham would say, showing relationships between new forms and those preceding them, is strong inferential evidence of evolution. There are gaps in the fossil record and some unusual occurrences, such as what is commonly called a Cambrian explosion. But the overall picture created by the fossil record is one of consistent incremental development. At the same time, the fossil record is not in any way, shape, or form suggestive of the idea of sudden generation of all life as it appears now, nor does it support transformationalism. There is no way to look at the fossil record and interpret the evidence as pointing towards anything other than evolution. Despite all the gaps in record and in our understanding, evolution and common descent are the only conclusions that are supported by the full spectrum of evidence. This is very important when considering inferential evidence, because inferential evidence can always, in theory, be challenged on its interpretation. Why interpret the evidence as inferring one thing rather than another? Such a challenge is only reasonable, though, when one has a stronger alternative, an alternative that not only explains the evidence better than what's being challenged, but which preferably also explains other evidence that the first explanation does not. We don't have this with any form of creationism. For all their insistence that evolution is only a faith because of so much evidence is merely inferential, they are unable to present an alternative that explains all that inferential evidence better than evolution, or even anywhere close to evolution. Inferential evidence isn't as strong as direct evidence, but is treated as sufficient in cases where enough evidence exists, and especially when there is no reasonable alternatives. This is great. I think this, in my mind, clarifies everything and how we want to proceed. Let me see if I can capture, based on what I just read. Here's where I think I've come to, is that we started with the Bible, and everybody, I'd say 100% of the people, believed in the stories of the Bible in terms of how they were described in a young earth, and Noah, and Jonah in the whale, and Tower of Babel, and all that stuff, and the flood and everything. Then, as man grew and experimented and got observational science, we started to see all these fossils, and we started to see all these other things, and came up with an alternative to the Bible. So that now the observational science then points to a new solution, a new explanation for everything, rather than for the Bible. And you have creationists, what they're doing is they're saying, no, nothing has changed. God's word is still truth. What he wrote in the Bible is still truth. And all this evidence that's been accumulating on all these different areas can be explained away. And they're right. If you take every piece of evidence and you can probably explain it away, but then it's up to creationists to say, okay, if what they say is true, if what Ken Ham says is true, that the earth is only 4,500 years old since the flood, then you have to explain to me how all those fossils got there and what they mean. What are all those fossils, and how did they get there? So it's one thing to say, I don't see a missing link. It's one thing to say, yeah, I see these, but where's the one in between that? And then you find one in between that says, all right, I see those, but where's the one in between those? And, Megan Fox said it correctly, that there is no videotape. So you have to infer based on what you say. So I think, to me, that makes sense. So I would say, in answer to these people in particular, that, we have a lot of fossil records. But if you don't believe that the fossil record points to an old Earth and molecules to mankind, explain what the fossil record does point and how that supports a young Earth. Explain how all these fossils happened for the last 4,500 years. You would think if things happened after Noah, and we had writing after Noah, so therefore people would write all this stuff down. There would be records of all this stuff, and there's not. So let me stop there and go to the next one. Okay, this one is sort of interesting. I'm going to okay, this one is sort of interesting, and I like it a lot. I like the question. So what she is saying is that there is a thing called DNA, and that somehow that plays into evolution, and that she's asking what mechanism has science discovered that evidences an increase in genetic information seen in any genetic mutation or evolutionary process. So I'm not sure. I did a lot of research on this. I'm not sure exactly what she means by genetic information. As Ken Ham talks about, and you can see through the debates, he talks about the fact that a poodle has less information than a wolf, and I can't figure that out. They have the same number of chromosomes, the same number of genes, so therefore it'd be the same amount of information. Whether he thinks that a poodle is somehow less evolved than a wolf, I'm not sure. So I'm not sure exactly what she's saying here. But let's put it this way. I think that this is an area where she needs to study. We need to study DNA, and we can apply it. And I would like to see creationists doing work on DNA and trying to put forth a process by which they're suggesting that mutations don't happen. After all, their theory is that God created each animal in his kind, and they haven't changed. So we know that animals change. We've seen that. Whether that's because of an increase of information or a decrease of information, I think is not as important as, that DNA does cause change. So I'd be interested to know what she has here. And also finally on this is sort of a loaded question. I think she's saying she doesn't believe this mechanism exists rather than just asking the question. Okay, so she asks for an increase in information. So I found this slide, the genome size ranges for various life forms. And you can see that mycoplasm, bacteria, algae, worms, crustaceans, insects, birds, reptiles, mammals, that there seems to be a general increase in information. So I think that's the first thing to answer her question. She says somebody needs to show her an increase in information. Well, there it is. But I think it's more important here that the question is important in the sense that here is a creationist saying, okay, I want to deal with evolution on a scientific basis. It's not a quoting of Bible, scriptures. It's not just saying that God created it and therefore it's true. This is saying, okay, let's look at how science then informs a theory. So my question to her, given this, is that she would say that God then created the genomes in this size for all these animals and that they don't change at all. I guess is what she's saying. So what she's saying is you would have to prove to her that these have changed over time in order for her to believe that evolution is valid, I guess is what she's saying. So these are the final two questions relating to the Big Bang Theory. Where did the exploding star come from? And I suspect he means where did the Big Bang come from? And then if God did not create everything, how did the first single-celled organism originate? And she asked by chance. And of course the answer is yes. But these represent some very interesting perspective about creationism. If you were going to build a scientific curriculum and you followed these people, you wouldn't look at science because ultimately there would be questions you could not answer. So I'm not sure what they're hoping to say here. I as a non-believer in God, when I look at these questions, I'd say, okay, yeah, maybe there is a God, and maybe God did create everything in the beginning, but that doesn't change anything to trying to figure out where my universe is. So these are interesting questions, but you can't build a scientific curriculum about the fact that eventually, ultimately, and this goes back actually to Heisenberg, ultimately, if you can't know something, does that mean that you shouldn't try to understand as much about it as possible? So that's it. I'm done with this. I just wanted to go through it, and hopefully there'll be some things that I'll like. Hope you liked it. It's the whole thing.